Welcome to episode 18 of It's About Data, the podcast about data, analytics, AI, and whatever else we feel like talking about. Your hosts are Tony Baer of DB Insights and Matt Housley of Halfpipe Systems. This week we're discussing AWS Summit 2025 in New York City. All right, Tony, you just got back from AWS Summit in New York City, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this because it's not reInvent, and yet New York City is a huge tech market now, and so Amazon still chooses to release some significant news there.
Well, AWS Summit, actually, that's what was held in New York officially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they've been doing it, but it's basically regional summits, and they tend to, they're free admission, so it tends to be very developer centric events.
Yeah.
Very low key. And in the past, actually, I used to kind of look forward to this, in midsummer because it would be like a casual afternoon spent on the expo floor with a chance to get a few one-on-ones.
Yeah.
But in the last few years, with basically AI really becoming, very paramount, AWS realized that they need another venue to speak to the analyst and influencer community to deliver their message on AI because it could otherwise get drowned out at reInvent.
Yeah.
And so it has expanded out into at least for analysts, a multi-day event. New York in the height of July and the heat of the summer. Would I prefer them to do it some other times? I think, yeah, but I can understand from their timing that obviously doing it in the fall would just be too close to reInvent. So
right.
That's essentially, so what I was at was, it was Summit, but there was also a 2-day analyst summit that was attached to that.
Got it. And it sounds like this is regional, but it's also like an opportunity to basically have news throughout the year, especially in the Gen AI hype cycle or whatever we want to call it. As things are happening, it seems like every week. And
of course, New York is basically a place which will draw attention as opposed to, let's say, doing it in Louisville. No offense to Louisville, but you'll probably get more media spotlight in New York. But anyway, so there were several. I'll go through a few of these things. There were basically about 4 or 5 things that really stuck out. I'll start. Agents was obviously the big thing. I'll deal with that in a moment. But initially, because of with my love in the data space, AWS issued essentially some very logical updates of SageMaker catalog, which they originally introduced last fall. Now, little background on that. SageMaker catalog is not a totally new product invented from thin air. It actually is the evolution of DataZone, and they say it's built on Glue, but it's not directly built on Glue. So AWS still, Glue is still the technical metadata catalog, and DataZone now SageMaker catalog is really more the business catalog and more the governance catalog. Eventually, over time, my take is that those two will gradually converge. But for now, it's basically it's still a series of connections. But they did several logical things. One is that when SageMaker catalog was announced back at reInvent, it was the catalog for SageMaker Lakehouse, for Iceberg, which meant that those are the S3 buckets that were governed by governed by Iceberg. I don't know if governed is the right term, using the Iceberg table format, and of course at the time, as AWS had also introduced a new premium tier, which is S3 tables, which is an optimized S3 for Iceberg. So what they've done here is they've extended coverage of SageMaker catalog now to all your S3 buckets. So it's not just the Lakehouse. So therefore, you can bring it in opportunistically on a project by project basis, and then selectively, you publish and share it with the, I don't know if we would call it data sharing, but you can basically authorize basically members of your team or your organization.
Can you cross-authorize to other accounts? That's always a critical issue, right? Like, can you cross-authorize to partners, for example?
No, not at this point. It's not meant for external. It's very much for internal.
Got it.
I think the question that I thought that was kind of interesting there potentially is that of course, a number of AWS's large customers, especially the ones that have come together with the M&A, may have multiple accounts. And so that's actually a good question, which I really did, which I should take as some homework there.
Well, and they introduced the notion of an organization, which is a container for a bunch of accounts to address exactly this problem. And so I'll have to dig into that and see if there's a way to like do within organization sharing and then cross organization sharing, basically.
There are probably indirect ways you can do it. I have a feeling that probably doing this more seamlessly will come in a future rev.
Yeah.
So another piece that they came down, and again, not earth-shattering, but logical, is that now SageMaker Catalog will not only store your data assets and your metadata assets, or I shouldn't say, it stores your metadata assets.
Yeah.
And the assets that point to to metadata, and to various, let's say, data pipelines and what I would call recipes. But now you can also include QuickSight BI visualizations. So that's another asset that can now be discovered and managed and governed in SageMaker Catalog. Again, nothing earth-shattering. It's it's logical. Logical enhancement. Another part. This is why we talked about Glue before. Is that Glue is still technically a separate catalog, but now you can automate the onboarding of updates, kind of like a CDC, like a change stream from Glue, as opposed to having to manually poll or do this in some sort of batch. You can now basically decide that these assets, where the technical metadata is in Glue, will automatically refresh SageMaker Catalog. And another interesting one, and this kind of opened like a bit of a Pandora's box. This gets into catalog federation. Now, this is not quite that yet, but it's a step towards that because, frankly, most organizations are not going to have one single enterprise data catalog. And so they've initially implemented a metadata sync with Collibra. And what they strongly hinted that there will others that will follow. And it's basically an API-based sync. So it's not like, in the application, click to sync. It still requires basically some integration, through an API. So it's not totally seamless, but it's a logical step forward towards catalog federation.
Well, and it comes back to something else we talked about, which is in the context of Oracle, actually, in AWS, which is Amazon is just pushing a lot more partnerships. I mean, I think the attitude used to be just use Glue Catalog. You can run Collibra if you want to, but that's none of our business. To Collibra is now a partner of AWS, basically.
Yeah, I mean, AWS has lots of frenemies. There was, MongoDB is one obvious one, and even more obvious one because there had been some discord between them. Is Elastic, and now they are partners.
I did not know that.
Admittedly, Elastic is not directly they're trying to diversify away from just their core log search. And so therefore they're basically saying we don't do OpenSearch is not a 100% direct competitor. Elastic says they do other things besides that. But the other interesting part of all this is looking at what about more technical catalogs like Unity, Polaris, and I definitely think that's something that AWS wants to bring into the scheme. But on the other hand, the question is, would it be at the SageMaker catalog level or the Glue level? Now, again, if they brought the two of them together, it would be a moot point. It'd be an academic question. But for now, it's not academic. But I mean, there are no promises there. But I got a strong sense from AWS that they're looking to basically federate with others.
It makes sense. I mean, part of this is AWS's long-term transformation into an enterprise organization. So I feel like back in 2015, when I was really getting into AWS, they were still very focused on Silicon Valley and startups, but they really wanted to expand in the enterprise space. And being an enterprise company means that you have to have a lot of frenemies, right? Like if you're Oracle, you have a very complex love-hate relationship with Microsoft and frankly every other big software player. And so as Amazon becomes more like Oracle, more like Microsoft, IBM, they have to make these partnerships.
I mean, customers are bringing them together.
Yeah,
I mean, customers are forcing the issue.
Yeah.
And the thing is that multi-cloud used to be a dirty word at Amazon, and now you
Yeah.
will hear it.
Yeah. And you'll hear it more and more,
Yeah,
honestly. I'm sure you will.
it's the reality out there, and
Yeah.
it's the reality more in terms of that. It's a reflection of actually how it's a reflection of how much clouds are becoming, being mainstreamed. And
Yeah.
so as you mainstream, you're going to have to deal with the heterogeneity that is the IT landscape, the technology landscape of most large enterprises, even some
Right.
mid-sized ones.
Yeah. And it's not pretty and it makes your head hurt. And I think a lot of Silicon Valley engineers who come out of the startup culture kind of hate it because they want a very simple stack that they build, but this is the reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So how about, I mean, to me, there's another elephant in the room, which is agents. We've been talking about this since we started this show again and again. So tell us about agents at AWS Summit.
Oh, there's absolutely no mention of agents at all, and boy, would I be lying through my teeth. Uh, AWS, this year is the year that everybody is rolling out their agentic, development and runtime frameworks. Um, Databricks beat everybody to the punch last year, but this year everybody else is kind of hopping that bandwagon. And for AWS, there are a couple of things. Agent Core was really the spotlight, and Agent Core, which is now coming out in preview, it's really focused on the runtime. And I'm just looking through kind of the laundry list here. It's a runtime that basically manages manages your session, and also does quite a bit of caching. And the idea behind that is that it's kind of like the equivalent in the database world of transaction state.
Okay.
In terms of that, when you have an agent that's basically executing a workflow, when the next piece starts, you need to understand what step are you in that workflow.
Right. And what data have you seen before? What data did you use in the previous steps? And that might be a bunch of different pieces of data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so part of this is basically, as I said, is they have what they call memory for preserving context. Again, it's the agentic equivalent, AI equivalent of transaction state.
Right.
It's also very focused on runtime isolation, with the idea that different pieces of this workflow will be it's almost like having checkpoints.
Okay.
The idea is that you have some separation there, so that if certain pieces of if certain links in the chain are weak, you can focus on those links in the chain, and also really start to look at what point did this process go south.
Got it. And so your agents are like checking each other basically, and maybe even retrieving data to make sure that they got the right
and
thing.
there'll be some agents to check agents, models to check models, and all that sort of wonderful stuff. There's of course there's the ID and access management. So in other words, like you might have the authorization to do this step, but this next step, do you have that same entitlement? And so that's the type of thing. It's not a static thing as opposed to, let's say, just doing a get from a database.
Yeah.
There's also what they call code interpretation, and it's basically about kind of a secure sandbox for code execution. And then internally there's also a number of things so that you can conduct observability. So I mean, these are all good things. I'll get to where I think the gaps are. But a couple of interesting points, which is really looking more at the integration with the outside world and with external tools and data sources, is MCP server integration.
Everyone has to have it now. And we talked about this recently, like a couple episodes ago, right? How MCP really seemed to be winning the horse race, and everyone was jumping on board. Sorry, mixed metaphor.
Darn it, Anthropic, when are you going to finally fully give this to a community? I mean, I just don't see why they're hanging on to it. I mean, given just the incredible momentum, that MCP is having, for all its gaps. And the other part of all this is that, we always very often think about agents in the context of running against internal systems. Well, there's a browser extension here so that you can execute steps over the web. Okay. And that's both interesting and potentially dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And my concern at this point, and it's not a criticism of AWS by any means, because it's something that as an industry, we really haven't figured this out, is that we can do observability. you can see is the right code executed and all that
Right.
type of
Right.
thing. And but on the other hand, are the outcomes are these the right outcomes that
Yeah.
we need? And I won't say outcomes that we expect, because sometimes, you're solving a problem, you may not have any ideas to what the outcome is, but is it the problem you're solving? What this reminds me of was recent consulting project I was doing, and I used Copilot fairly extensively, but the idea is I
Yeah.
used it with the idea of, okay, and give me a source, give me a citation. And part of, I would say like 40 or 50% of the time, either the citation, either the answer is right, but the citations were wrong,
Yep. Yep.
or the answers were wrong, but the citations were right.
Yeah.
And so, and this is more of a, basically a learning curve type of thing. I mean, it's still, as Sanjeev basically sort of emphasized to me, said, just remember the 50% of the time that I got it right. And I said, Sanjeev, I'm not going to argue with you on that. But the fact is that I don't think as a community, as an industry, we really know how to basically manage outcomes. And I think that's especially relevant because with agents, there are all these multiple autonomous, basically,
Yeah.
actors here, moving parts.
Yep.
And many of those moving parts are non-deterministic. And
Yeah.
that's okay. We just have to engineer around that. But ultimately, the gating factor is outcomes. And so that's something which the industry has not really solved. That's probably more of that's more of like a deep think question, or my brain hurts question about, where agents are and where they're going.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my question to you is, as you're trying to use these tools in your consulting and analytics practice, how do you check your work? And I think what Ali Ghodsi said recently, probably against Databricks marketing would be my guess, is that for the foreseeable future, we need to check the work of agents. And yet in practice, a lot of people are not doing that. A lot of attorneys are not doing that, and basically turning in bad work with bad
Yeah.
citations
Yeah.
or bad information, or both in some cases, and getting sanctioned. My worry is, I noticed this early on, that if you were not an expert in something, then ChatGPT would give you a very convincing answer. If you were an expert in something, you would see that it was 90% correct, but you would also see that the 10% that was wrong was very, very off and would completely ruin the rest of the answer, right?
Or it could be the other way around.
Yeah, yeah,
Very, very, very easily. And I was reading another piece, actually, it was in the New Yorker. It was a college professor talking to students and how they were using, Gen AI,
yeah,
and it was not exact. I didn't exactly feel very encouraged reading it, but
right.
the thing is that a lot of them just cared about getting an answer that looked right to the professor, and the fact is that the reality. I mean, this gets into broader issues, deeper issues, which is that yes, there are ways of checking, but on the other hand, they're not. They are certainly not foolproof.
Well, they're not foolproof, and it gets to be so much work to check the work that at
Yeah,
some point you have to ask the question, well, is this really a
right,
worthwhile tool, or is it actually
right,
just creating more work for me?
exactly. A
Yeah,
couple other things just to round
yeah,
this out.
yeah,
Introduce, as I said, Agent Core is really about the runtime.
yeah,
Hero is about, is essentially the development time, the
yeah,
IDE, and it's taking a declarative approach. So that's kind of interesting. And the idea here, and I still am trying to get my arms around this exactly what this means, but what they're saying is that it's essentially translating your prompts or your instructions into what AWS calls specifications. So it's kind of like
okay,
structuring these into kind of like a kind of almost like a, a, a PRD, something like that, a requirements document for this agent. So it gives you the functional requirements, this technical design,
yeah,
and the implementation, and how the task that that needs to to take on. What's interesting is that it actually is not it can work. It's not only it can work outside AWS, so that's kind of interesting. As I said, I still need to get my arms around Kiro,
yeah,
but it is an interesting step in terms of taking agentic development, basically a step up from your technical practitioners.
yeah.
But again, I don't think this is really a citizen development tool yet, but I think it's more of a way of just trying to have a higher level sort of approach to what should this agent do and what's required of it. And so I think it's a very interesting approach that they're taking.
Interesting. Is AWS more of a fast follower here, or is this something fundamentally new that competitors haven't released yet?
I will put it this way. I think with Agent Core, I think everybody's playing leapfrog. I think with Hero, that does seem to be kind of, fairly unique from what I've seen out there. Now, I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'm sure if we look at the long tail, there probably are some very interesting sort of declarative approaches to developing agents. I'm not an expert on that, but I think it's certainly in keeping up. It certainly is keeping up in the field. Now, I've had discussions with some fellow analysts who say, "Oh, AWS is so far behind in AI," and I'm thinking, like, I think it really depends on the use case and the type of model, and they're all going to have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. Well, and I just don't know that it matters. I think it's such early days right now that we'll see constant leapfrogging for the next several years.
Exactly. And just to finally, this is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
AWS Marketplace now have a separate section for agents.
Interesting. Just so following Google in this respect.
Exactly.
And others. Yeah. Like Agentforce, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, kind of like what you'd expect.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
and then, the last piece of news that caught my eye, which you saw something about as well, was vector databases on S3. And I need to dig into this more because I don't entirely understand how you run a vector database on top of object storage. Maybe it's more as a caching layer where you kind of spin up a cache on top, or not a caching layer, deep storage layer where you spin up a cache on top. But I need to do some reading on that. It's interesting because in the early days of the Gen AI boom, vector databases were all the rage. They kind of subsided a bit, right? I think they're definitely in the mix, but it's not what everyone's talking about.
Well, okay. I had a good, kind of a funny exchange with Wansukate on LinkedIn about this.
Oh, interesting.
I said, vector databases. Oh, never heard of it. and I said, maybe it's because these are products, these are features masquerading as products. Vector storage is a feature. It's a data type. And yes, you have Milvus and Pinecone that will give you 12 different, vector indexes. Okay.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's a data type. It's a feature. And what this is essentially, I think what's really more significant is because I think this is really being it's implemented, especially with the Lakehouse in mind. It's really part of what a new strategy. I mean, AWS has always had tiers of storage, SLAs on S3. So that's not new, but what is new is just kind of the optimizations at the data and AI infrastructure level.
Yeah.
And and so they introduced S3 tables, which with the rollout of SageMaker Lakehouse with their Iceberg.
Yeah.
It's not required, but you're going to get much better performance. But it's proprietary. Now, I'm not sure how publicly available that API is. I do know that third parties are adopting it. I don't know what exactly the commercial arrangement is there. So I see the S3 vector is basically being kind of in step with that. It's just another tier of S3 storage that's optimized in this case, for vector searches.
Yeah.
Well, and also for scalability, because the other thing too, one thing and I think this is all part and parcel of it, is that up until now, most with vectors, it's been basically kind of like individual applications, doing a similarity search. Mm-hmm. So fairly almost like sandboxy, point implementations. When you start doing agents, this is going to multiply your surface area. Yeah. And therefore, it is going to demand a new approach to scale and performance, with regard to doing similarity searches. Now, what we did not hear yet from AWS is some type of knowledge graph or some sort of graph rag. But I've got to believe that. Watch this space. I've got to believe that's coming. Just it'll probably be implemented at the SageMaker catalog level. Yeah, because it's really like an overlay. It's not it's not the way you physically store. Like it's almost like a view, materialized view. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that coming along. Yeah, someplace down the road, and not too far down the road.
Yeah. Well, rewinding to what you were talking about earlier, not that long ago, all the rage was RAG, just like we were saying. But now everyone talks about context engineering, which involves RAG, but also maintaining state between steps and separation of state in some cases, like you're saying, for cleanliness, basically. Yeah.
It's more the range of scenarios, use cases is broadening. In some
Yeah.
cases, RAG versus fine tuning, and maybe some combination of both, and also
Yeah.
what mix of what mix of models we use and all that. So I mean, it's just more a sign of that we're starting to look at this more holistically as we start
Yeah.
to really expand out the surface area, for use cases.
Yeah, and trying to fix some of the problems and limitations instead of just hyping things, right? And saying
Yeah,
this is what our customers actually need to do their job.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I just can't wait for reInvent.
Fantastic. Well, it's funny how we're to the point where even in the summer there's a lot of news, and as long as
Oh
we're in
man,
this Gen AI boom, I don't think that's going to change. So
I just
plenty
I
to
just
talk
want to
about.
quit for the rest of the summer.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and just ride your bike, basically.
well, yeah, I keep trying to get out, but they keep pulling me back in.
All right, well, fantastic. Let's close it out there because we've already gone kind of long, but we will follow up a lot of these announcements in future episodes down the road.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Take care.